All right. So again, welcome everyone. It's been a long time since we touched base virtually, and it's good to see many of you. This webcast is called Putting the Pieces Together, Preparation for the Perkins Grant Application. This is a follow-up to the presentation that we had this summer called the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment Requirements, where we went into detail on the steps of conducting the needs assessment. And over the last 6 months, those of you planning to apply for Perkins funds have been embarking on a robust needs assessment process, looking at your data and engaging stakeholders in discussions about the data and solutions for where you see data gaps. Today's presentation is about organizing the results that you've been compiling in preparation for the Perkins Grant application. And we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. I think that's probably going to be best so that we don't get questions for things that we're going to cover during the course of the presentation. As I mentioned, since about last summer, you've been undertaking the important process of compiling your data and engaging stakeholders in the comprehensive local needs assessment. This process and the results of the assessment will help you set a strategic plan for the next 2-year grant cycle and prepare you for completing your Perkins application. With your application due date really just 5 months away, it's time to consider how you'll pull those results and that information together, prioritize the needs of your district, and report what you've learned. Today's presentation will focus on ways to synthesize your findings, prioritize your needs, and develop a strategic plan for implementing activities to reduce data gaps. The CLNA guide serves as your roadmap for conducting the CLNA. It will be helpful for you to reference to make sure you have all the bases covered. Here's our agenda for the next hour or so. First, we'll briefly review the Perkins 5 law, its themes and purpose of the CLNA. For more detail, again, reference past training in the CLNA guide. Then we'll take more time to focus on compiling the CLNA results and tying the results to the application, which will include some basic do's and don'ts. So let's get started. The updated Act was renamed and signed into law in July 2018. It required updating the state plan with how the law and the grant will be implemented in our state, and both of those things can be found on the DPI website. There were changes with Perkins 5, which now focuses on 4 key themes: data-driven decision-making through the comprehensive local needs assessment, meaning that all decisions about programs and budgets need to be based on data with input from stakeholders. Enhanced efforts to serve special population groups, basically access to CTE offerings for special population groups defined in the law. Continuous improvement process tied to student performance and accountability indicators defined in the law, and quality career pathways as defined by the state that target current and future labor market needs in high-skill, high-wage, and in-demand sectors. So let's go over those a bit more deeply to understand what each theme is getting at. The purpose of data-driven decision-making is to identify the highest needs of your students and programs through robust data analysis. This is the reason for the needs assessment. This means looking at student demographic data, who is participating and concentrating in pathways or pathway quality components, and who is not. Who's meeting performance measures and who is not? What does business and industry say is needed compared to what you have to offer? This is all considered data. Once you observe gaps between what is and what should be, determine the root cause or the main reason why that's the case. Determine evidence-based activities and initiatives that will address the root cause so as to improve your data over the next 2 years. And target purchases that are intended to support those activities and initiatives so that change becomes evident or becomes a reality. Theme 2 focuses on enhanced efforts to serve special population groups you have in your district. This is why you break out your data by demographics: individuals with disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged families, individuals preparing for non-traditional occupational fields, English learners, individuals who are homeless, students who are in foster care, single parents, including pregnant students, youth with a parent who is in active duty in the armed forces, and ESSA subgroups, that are racial and ethnic groups and migrant student breakdowns. So what does this mean exactly? Each of these groups face potential barriers in accessing or succeeding in CTE. When you disaggregate your data by student groups for the CLNA, any disproportionality between students doing well and students who are not, or becoming concentrators and those who are not, is cause for investigation as to why. The why will be different for each group because their roadblocks are different. The third theme is a continuous improvement process related to performance indicators. Recipients of Perkins are required to do better on these annually. This is also a focus area of the CLNA and Perkins application. You're looking at which demographic groups of CTE concentrators are meeting the performance indicators and which groups of concentrators are not. Then explore what the root cause is for those who are not and what to do about it. More details on the indicators and how to read the data can be found in past presentations. Notice what's not on the list. While important in having a robust quality career pathway, IRCs, dual credit, and CTSOs are not tied to performance measures. So in this part of the application, you would not be addressing those quality measures. So here we go with the fourth theme, which is quality career pathways. The career pathway must meet size, scope, and quality components outlined in Appendix A of the application instructions. First, an approvable pathway must address a state or region labor market need in a high-skill, high-wage, or in-demand industry sector, and offer secondary students in the district a sequence of 2 courses in a pathway from introductory to a more advanced course. And then 2 of any one of the following: work-based learning experience outlined in the work-based learning guide that aligns with the pathway, not just any random work-based learning. IRCs that are required for the pathway, dual credit opportunities within the pathway, or CTSO involvement that is aligned with instruction in the pathway. The purpose of the CLNA. The CLNA requirement is more than simply an exercise or a box to check off. You know, there, we've done it. Shoo, move on. Actually, if leveraged correctly, it's what defends your grant application priorities and how you're using the limited funds to meet your most urgent needs related to the purpose of the grant. Also, the CLNA is not only a Perkins law requirement. Federal Uniform Grant Guidance law deals with costs, and it states that all costs must be necessary to carry out the intent of the federal grant. Your CLNA results reflected in your application determines if your budget purchases are necessary. How do you know if something is necessary? Well, it all ties back to the data. If there's a data gap and there's a root cause that needs to be addressed to reduce that gap, you have a need. If there is not a data gap or a root cause of a gap that you need to address, then a cost is not considered necessary. Then there's another reason. Your CLNA results and strategic plan can be leveraged for support of your programs beyond just Perkins funds. It can be used to gain support from your school boards, the wider community, and business and industry partners. So now that we've laid that groundwork and level setting around Perkins expectations, let's move into checking on the status of your CLNA. Over the last 4 months, you've been focused on planning for the assessment. You've gathered your disaggregated data and put it into understandable formats for your stakeholders. By now, you should be having those discussions with different stakeholder groups that are required. Do you have your meetings and feedback loops charted out for the next 3 months so that you have your strategic plan in place and you're ready to draft your application in March? A broad range of stakeholders will not only shed light on the root causes of your data gaps, but can inform the activities needed to close those gaps. As you look at this chart, in the final phase of the process around February, once your leadership team has determined what's needed to address root causes and moving the bar forward for your programs, you'll want to vet the strategic plan with stakeholders you had in your initial conversations to make sure you haven't missed the mark and that you're on the right track and you have support for the plan moving forward. Make any needed adjustments then before you start completing your application. Your strategic plan shouldn't be a secret. It's what communicates your agencies to the consortium's priorities and the community. Everyone should know it exists and understand it, whether it's administrators, teachers, students, and parents, and even board members should be aware of the needs and where the CTE program wants to go. So where are you with your CLNA action plan? Are you on track? How will your agency prioritize moving forward? Now on to compiling your results. Keep in mind that you're analyzing data for each focus area listed on the left column. When you do that, you're exploring where you see data gaps. What is the root cause of the gap? How will you tackle the root cause so that's no longer the cause of your data gap? What is your goal related to the data gap? And do certain data gaps or root causes cross over from one focus area to another? If so, how will you communicate this in your application? What activity will move the bar in mitigating the root cause and achieving the goal and outcome you desire? Consider which activities you're going to address through the Perkins grant and what you'll address through other resources. You probably can't address everything, and some things may take longer to see the results. Discuss what you'll focus on over the next 2 years that will mitigate the root causes and improve your data. Focus your efforts on those things that will make the greatest impact over the next 2 years. Nice to do activities or nice to have activities, or those that you've done for the last 10 years and still haven't seen results, probably shouldn't be a priority for Perkins funding. Rather, focus on what will actually reduce the gap between where you are right now and where you want or need to be, and move that bar on student outcomes. That's what your team is tasked with determining through the CLNA and strategic planning process. Your data-driven decision-making should revolve around the following, and these align with the Perkins themes: the narrowing of the data gaps between what currently is and what you want your data to show, equitable access for all students of various demographic groups. In other words, removing any barriers to engagement and successful outcomes, equitable teaching practices, which may require specific PD based on the needs of certain populations or students through multi-level systems of support training for CTE teachers and others. Expand career pathway quality, elements in either work-based learning, IRCs, dual credit, or CTSO involvement based on any demographic groups or disproportionality you see. Any needed PD or training targeted to the root cause, and of course, purchasing priorities to get you there. To provide a visual for you, this flowchart reflects how the CLNA process starts with analyzing the data that's tied to each focus area. Identification of the root cause of your data gap is key. The root cause actually informs what types of activities you need in order to mitigate the root cause of the data gap. For example, a root cause related to outdated equipment will require a different activity and spending than a root cause attributed to lack of outreach to the community. And then you'll prioritize resources for those activities. Your Perkins application must reflect this through line between your data gaps and the root causes, goals, gaps, and activities to address the root cause. And finally, the financial resources that will support the activities. In terms of your strategic plan, financial resources may include Perkins funds, local funds, or support from the community and other grants. Perkins funding is probably the most strict in terms of following this through line. What other resources do you have that offers more flexible spending? For example, I know that some agencies have used their technical incentive grant funds to purchase things that they weren't allowed to purchase with Perkins funds, either because there wasn't a root cause tied to it or because it didn't align with uniform grant guidance, allowable spending. When it comes to career pathways, the state is required to not only review your CLNA results, but to review and approve your pathway for meeting size, scope, and quality requirements. Only CTE career pathways that meet size, scope, and quality requirements at the time of the application and for which you have data gaps should be included in the application. Perkins 5 funds are to expand the quality components of an existing career pathway, not to start a pathway. That needs to be really at the grassroots, local level with committing resources to get something off the ground, and then Perkins is used to expand it. Career pathway approval requires that at the time of the application, the pathway is, number one, aligned to labor market needs. 2, there must be at least 2 courses from introductory level to a more advanced course specific to the pathway. And the pathway must have at least 2 quality components. As mentioned before, that would be either be a work-based learning experience, industry recognized credential, a dual credit opportunity connected to that pathway, or a CTSO aligned to the pathway. Evidence must be provided reflecting that at least two of the components exist at the time of the application. This means that the course guide reflects the option to students and that students are enrolled and participating in the current year. Once your career pathway is approved, your CLNA findings will be evaluated to understand your data gaps, root causes of the gaps, your goals, outcomes, and activities that will be used to mitigate those root causes. Here's an example of the guidance provided in Appendix A for those of you that may not have seen that yet. There's a number of new people here today. Appendix A provides information on each of these quality components and what's required. This is an example for this sequence of courses. As mentioned, 2 courses need to exist from introductory to a more advanced level. In the guide, the left column explains the requirement. The middle column defines what counts as the course in this case, and the right column explains what you need to put in your application as evidence. Each pathway quality component provides guidance laid out in this way, and you'll just refer to Appendix A in the application instructions for more details on what you need to include. Okay, so you've gathered a lot of information, and the question at hand is how to tie relevant CLNA information you've gleaned to your application. Communicating the results in a clear and concise way through the WISE Grants portal continues to be a challenge for a number of agencies, while others could still do better to be in compliance with the requirements and reduce questions from reviewers. What we've found is that many agencies go through a pretty good CLNA process, and you're to be commended for that. But the information shared in the application is not always tied together in a coherent way, which leaves your reviewer completely confused. And some of you already know this. For example, we've seen notes from the CLNA process literally plopped into the application field with no rhyme or reason to it. In other cases, there has been very little information provided, leaving the reviewer wondering if the CLNA was even done. Others have written something that resembles a short dissertation, stating history, references, national data, etc. None of these is optimal. All your reviewer is looking for is that alignment, that through line that was discussed in the previous slide. Entering your relevant CLNA findings in the application has 2 purposes, so focus on this. It's required by law, so your reviewer needs to feel confident that the process was done. And 2, it justifies your funding priorities. You'll recall that one of the spending rules is that purchases must be necessary, according to your CLNA findings. I'm going to go over some suggestions for drafting your responses in the application. So let's take a look at what the fields in the system entail. Most of you know this, but as I said, we've got some new folks on the call today. For those of you who are new, you'll see the drop-down menu reflects the application sections. You'll go to the application tab at the top of the bar and then down to the CLNA. When you click on that, you see 3 sections: stakeholder reporting. Every stakeholder mentioned in the law and the CLNA guide must be engaged in the process, and this is where you record that information. Be careful not to double count the same people. The point of this is to get broad engagement of different people in order to gain different perspectives. You don't need to list every single person that was engaged in the process, but you need to reflect at least 2 people of every group in the process. And why is that? Stakeholders are the key to understanding root causes of data gaps. The application will ask you who you've engaged. Some grants ask for attendance records of meetings, some ask for meeting notes. We will simply ask you to indicate two things: who you engaged, and provide information 1 to 2 individuals that is not duplicative for each required stakeholder. This means that you can't engage a teacher who's involved as both a parent and a teacher. Then provide a summary of how you reached out and engaged different groups. For example, did you have surveys completed by certain groups? What was the focus of your surveys? Did you have meetings? Were they virtual? Were they in person? How did you do your outreach? The next section of the application is the focus areas: performance on accountability indicators, equity and access, educator recruitment, retention, and training. The last section, Perkins Pathways, is where your pathways will be approved for size, scope, and quality, and where you will put your pathway CLNA findings. For every focus area and the career pathways CLNA, there will be fields in the application where you're going to put your data, your findings, your goals with measurable outcomes, and activities. So the question at hand is, what should you put in these fields? And how will you combine the different variables, observations, and findings into a coherent, logical, and clear summary in the application? In terms of the data, it should be a summary of data you looked at to identify demographic gaps or programmatic gaps for a particular focus area. Explain how you broke out the demographic data and compare data sets, such as gender or ethnic groups compared to white students, or special ed compared to non-special education students. So just provide an explanation of the data that you evaluated, not the actual data. Indicate only the data gaps that you found. In other words, where did you see the gaps in data? What demographic groups are not achieving or persisting? For example, if your district has a population of 15% of English learners, but only 2% have achieved what other students have, that is a data gap. Then also in the findings, you'll explain the root cause of those gaps. Not a list of possible root causes or a list of brainstormed causes that you had in your meetings, which is a great start, but the main thing or two that is causing the data gap. You have limited resources, so only focus on what will bring about the greatest change. Your leadership teams, or in some cases, maybe additional surveys or meetings, may need to be had to boil down those root causes to what you think is really at the core of what's going on. Goals with measurable outcomes. What are your goals and measurable outcomes related to the data gap? Expressed as a SMART goal, what is the data change you want to see? So using that example of the EL students, what is the goal for the outcome data you want to see after 2 years? Perhaps that's why you want to see an increase of 5% of EL students participating in work-based learning. The activities field will have a drop-down menu from which you may choose a federally required activity to mitigate your data gap. If the drop-down menu options don't align exactly with an activity strategy or program you want to implement, you have the ability to choose Other and enter, just type in a more specific activity. What not to include in these data fields. In your findings, do not include philosophical arguments, research, or opinions not vetted through your stakeholders' input and analysis. Do not include more than 2 or 3 at the very most root causes. Again, we don't want a list of brainstorming possibilities of what the root cause. You need to have those discussions of what is really going on so that you can focus on that and change outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about the tools to help you get there. And when I say get there, I mean draft your responses. You've gleaned this information, you've got papers, you've got notes, you've got spreadsheets. And that's probably what a lot of you use to compile your information. Here's an example of a worksheet that I know some people have used in the past. It can help you to organize your information to prepare for the CLNA findings section. This sheet is organized in a way that each column represents a data field on the CLNA results section of the application. The left column reflects each focus area. So as you go across, there are fields for you where you can, input your information in preparation for entering information into the fields of the application. Describing the data you referenced in that cell, the stakeholders, the root causes, it's all kind of in one place for you to look at. The next couple slides provide examples of worksheets for your career pathways. You'll see that some of the things we talked about earlier as to what's required for size, scope, and quality. If you're the fiscal agent of a consortium, you'll list the districts that meet size, scope, and quality for that pathway in the consortium. A career pathway may be a locally developed pathway or regionally developed career pathway. It does not matter how your pathway was created. You will just input the name of the pathway. And in the system, there's actually a drop down that you'll select, or you'll be able to select other and type in the pathway. The pathway could be identified at the cluster level or be more specific. For example, if you have 2 different agriculture-related pathways, you could generalize at the cluster level, or you could enter each curricular focus separate. For example, animal systems, if it's robust enough to meet size, scope, and quality, you could do that. And then, have a different one of the ag areas. Here are examples for information you might enter for a health science career pathway. Make sure that you follow the size, scope, and quality Appendix A guidance as to what to include. So you can see here when it came to the sequence of courses, 3 courses are listed here, from introductory to more advanced, beautiful, and the work-based learning options that exist for that pathway at that district. Here are the industry recognized credential that's offered, dual credit opportunities, and CTSO. Remember, you only need, for a pathway to be approved, you only need 2 out of the 4 quality pathways. And so for the findings section of the application, the CLNA section, you'll want to organize your information similar to the other worksheet that we looked at. You'll want to speak to the data, the root causes of the data, and the goals and outcomes that you wish to see. And of course, the activity that you're going to do to mitigate that root cause. Next, or here we've got some examples from last year's application of data gaps and the aligned root cause of the gap and the targeted activities that are addressing the root cause. It's pretty good. And it talks about the purchases. So that was pulled from the budget section. So they have non-participation in work-based learning. They didn't break it out by demographics. That would have been ideal, but they just didn't have any work-based learning participation. The root cause is that students were not prepared for youth apprenticeship due to outdated equipment due to lack of prioritization of needs over the last 10 years. Updating equipment to industry standards is going to be their activity, and then what the purchase is, and then the measurable goal and outcome that they hope to see once they have addressed that root cause. The next data gap is that economically disadvantaged students participate in work-based learning at a rate of 50% less than non-economic disadvantaged students. The root cause was determined to be that transportation isn't available for one reason or another. Would have been nice to see more clarity about what that means. Does that mean that there isn't public transportation in the evenings? Does it mean that parents only have one car and can't take the student? You know, what really is at the root of that? But the activity that they're proposing is to provide transportation for students who are economically disadvantaged to work-based learning. I assume they're going to purchase taxi vouchers, and that as a result of that, participation of economically disadvantaged students in workplace learning will increase by 2%. And then the last example here, very few male students in the health pathway. Teachers don't engage males due to lack of knowledge of creative outreach and opportunities, and the activities that they're going to do professional development on engaging NTO students in the pathway. They're going to do that through purchasing conference registration and travel, and they hope to see an increase in NTO students by 5%. So that's the kind of information that once you've had these discussions and you sift through it, you're going to focus your application on what it is you want to focus on over the next 2 years. We don't need to know everything in terms of your application, but you need to know everything. So when reviewing your application's CLNA findings, this is basically the rubric that your reviewers use. And so try and look at this from your reviewer's perspective. They look for, in the data section, is the information on the type of disaggregated data reviewed and from where it was obtained clear and relevant? Yes, check mark. If no, either the application is going to be returned or there's going to be a follow-up question. Findings. Was a summary of what was learned related to data gaps and root causes provided? Yes, great, check. No? Then there's going to be a follow-up of some sort. Was the root cause actually related to the data gap? Or did the applicant start talking about something completely unrelated? If no, then it's going to be returned. Was the goal statement clear with measurable outcomes? Measurable outcomes have to be in a number. If not, it'll be returned. activities, strategies, and programs are clearly connected to addressing the root cause of the data gap? If yes, that's checked. Green light. If no, the application will be returned for correction. Okay. I apologize for this being so blurry. It's not great to take snips from WISE grants. Here are some examples of some things that we've seen. This shot of the CLNA results was taken from the Student Performance and Accountability Indicator section. It's completely inconsistent and was not approved. As we go through this, reflect back to what we've just been talking about. First, dual enrollment is mentioned in the findings. Dual enrollment is not an accountability indicator. So right there, that's a problem. There's also no reference to disaggregated data. Even if it was, even if it was an indicator, there's no reference to disaggregated data or who's not accessing dual credit. There's no root cause stated. So it's hard to know if the program goals and activities are even appropriate. And the fourth issue is that there's no connection between the gap expressed and the findings and the goals. Therefore, the goals and outcomes are irrelevant. There's some of these goals have nothing to do with the data gap that they mentioned. And let's look at the third row down, increase the number of post-secondary college options for CTE students. There's no number there. Actually, what they were probably getting at is that they have low numbers of students enrolled in dual enrollment. And what they actually want to increase are students participating in dual enrollment. And what should that percent be? Saying that you offer more options is not really an outcome. Remember, this is about student outcomes. Probably the more appropriate, if they would provide more information here, the career pathways area where you talk about industry recognized credentials, that would have been the more appropriate focus area. So here's an example of activities that were selected from the drop-down menu. Oh, this is from the same example. There was no root cause. So the activity is related to meeting Wisconsin's academic standards, but the dual enrollment was the data gap. So that doesn't really align. Also, the activity for special populations, but the finding did not reflect any data related to special population groups. So you can see that there's a lot missing from here. It's hard to say that, you know, activities are addressing something that's going to change and improve your program, and that spending should be allowed when nothing is really clear. It's blurry. Here's an example of data that was provided. Not good. First of all, your reviewers are not doing a data analysis. Please don't just plop data into the data section. Tell us what data you looked at and how you disaggregated it and what was important for you to look at. It's your agency's responsibility for digging into it and trying to understand it. A reviewer looking at this would really not know what it even means. Here are submitted budget line items tied to the selected activities in blue. So this is how we see it on the reviewer side. Whatever activity that you select is here in the header, and then we see what things you budgeted for that activity. The problem with this budget is that the purchases are for all students, not just female students. So this had to do, now I remember, this had to do with transportation field and wanting to get more females involved. But none of these purchases have to do with getting more females involved. So they had a root cause, they had a data gap, females, they had a root cause of I don't remember what it was, something related to feeling comfortable or knowing the opportunities that exist. But none of these purchases have to do with addressing the female data gap. So it wasn't approved. Here are two examples of how we'd like you to enter your information in the findings field. So let's say this is for the early education pathway. Yeah, I think that was the example that we took. So in the findings section, you're going to have a field, and you're going to write something like, the following list reflects our data gaps and the root causes for each data gap. First, participation in work-based learning for students who are economically disadvantaged is 50% less than every other student population in our district. The root cause is that the only work-based learning options for our students is youth apprenticeship. Students and their families either do not have transportation or the resources to cover the cost for transportation to and from the work site on a daily basis. Okay. So you have the data gap and you have the root cause. It's clear, you know, the students, economically disadvantaged students, are clearly not participating after discussion with their families. Transportation is a key issue. Now, I suppose we're not, in this example, we're not going into the activities, but they could, well, as it says here for the root cause, they could cover the cost of transportation, or maybe they decide to start a school-based enterprise of some sort. Or, well, that wouldn't be for education, I guess, but some other work-based learning experience dealing with education, so that students don't have to just participate in youth apprenticeship and travel across the county. The next example, perhaps over the last 2 years, few to no male students have taken any courses in the education and training pathway. The root cause, based on feedback from students and families in particular, is that of perception. Male students and their families do not perceive education, particularly early childhood, as a viable, self-sustaining, or fulfilling career option due to what they've seen, heard, and experienced from those they know. The second root cause, so they're including 2 root causes, that's okay, is that the district does not provide options to learn, experience middle and secondary education, which seemed to be a possibility if something in that realm was offered early on. Okay, so I'm taking that to mean, you know, maybe young men would be more interested in working with older kids if there was an opportunity to have that experience. So to address this, more needs to be done through our ACP to engage students in exposure in creative ways to opportunities early on in middle and high school. So very simple. This is all that you need to have in your findings. A clear data gap, a clear root cause, And then you'll go down and select the activity that matches that, addressing that root cause. And we're almost wrapping up here. So here are some common do's and don'ts. I really don't want to read through all of this. I don't think you want me to read all of this, but these are things that we tend to see that tend to either be positive things or negative things. And then, of course, things to be aware of that usually prompt a question. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but just things to be aware of and maybe address on the front end rather than your reviewer questioning you about it on the back end. Here are some additional tools and resources that can help you in your analysis and synthesizing your results. All of this is on the DPI website. Please use what's been created for you to help you do this work. Some of it is from other areas, other grants that also have a needs assessment process. And maybe there are some things, some tools in there that will help you or resonate with you, or tools that your district is already using when doing assessments for some of these other grants. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Great, we've got just a couple. Oh, just one. Leah, is there an explanation of the pre-populated activities? I find we often interpret the activities different than the way they were intended or written. There is some interpretation there. They're not written great in WISE grants, and it's because we're using the actual federal language because they're required activities by the feds. I think you just need to be clear in your root cause so that the alignment can be clear and not a lot of questions asked. I guess that's the best I can offer right now. And you can always reach out to your reviewer ahead of time. Now, one time I had somebody want me to review everything before they submitted it. That's not going to happen. But you can ask clarifying questions. Your reviewer just doesn't have the capacity to read two applications. So yeah, Eric, you got the same question. Let me move this over. Oops. Not seeing all your questions here. Yep, Eric, I know. I'm your reviewer, and that sometimes it requires conversation, and sometimes, you know, you guys have a good perspective. And, the thing is there are 60 of you and many different parts to the application. And I'm not sure what more to say about that other than you and your reviewer can keep working at that. Probably not what you want to hear. Other questions? I'm going to turn off the recording. Other questions? No questions. I stopped recording, so you can ask. Anybody want me to touch on an area again? You can unmute if you like. What is rolling around in your head? Well, if there's no questions, I'm going to.
I'm sorry, Fritz. I do have a
Hi,
question and
Sarah.
I'm nervous to ask it.
Don't be nervous.
I know there's a lot of changes at the federal level. So do we anticipate any changes when it comes to Carl Perkins?
No, no, it's Carl Perkins has, at least not that we've been notified. I'm not worried at this point in time for the next year. Um, there's always been bipartisan support for this legislation. And all that's really happening regarding this grant is that it will be administered by the Department of Labor instead of the Department of Education. And a number of education programs are going to the Department of Labor. And it will be different on our end because how we submit information, how we submit the data to the feds, how we do the claims with the feds, that's going to change. But in terms of the funding level or the law, we've not gotten any inkling that there's going to be major changes or even little changes. Doesn't mean that it
Thank
can't
you.
happen, but as of right
I
now, that's
understand.
what
I
it
just
is.
was like, oh, I'll just ask.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank
No
you.
problem. You know, there are other grants that have been like literally on the chopping block, and Perkins has not been one of those.
That's good.
Yep. Other questions? All right. Well, then I'm going to let you go and finish off your day. So thanks for coming, and reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to have office hours later this month again, so be sure to stop in there if you end up having any follow-up questions. Have a good day.